everyone for joining us tonight. I just want to introduce a couple of folks and lay out the process for tonight. We thank you all for joining us. As Elaine Sanfilippo had mentioned, we would encourage you please to mute and turn off your video, and it just helps us so much better with the connection from our end for everyone. So if you can just please double check your mute box and make sure you're muted appropriately.
I think I'm muted.
Nope. We can tell you're not. There. So my name is Brooke Munch. I'm Superintendent of Schools, and Dr. Todd McGuire is joining us.
Doesn't work.
He's joining us, and he will kind of play tag off of each of the questions as we work through them. Elaine Sanfilippo has been manning our chat line for all of our sessions. This is our fourth one tonight. And so we thank you, Elaine, for doing that. And I think Mike Tollefson, I'm not sure if he's on yet, but I think that he is going to also help to man for answering questions. So what we're looking for from the chat really is just for questions that, you know, if we're not answering something that's on your mind, we want to make sure that you ask through there. We basically received about 100 questions in total for purposes of these forums. We want to also point out that we have, and Todd, I'll turn it over to you in half a minute to talk about the tab that's on our website right now and what's posted on that. So do you want to just touch base on that, please?
Sure. So what we've done is created a tab on the website that is titled Fall Reopening. So any information tied to the reopening of schools, all of the memos that we send out, frequently asked questions, you know, new guidance that comes out from DESE, we are currently putting up there as soon as we get it. We've also posted results from surveys that we have sent out to the community as well. And then any of our initial plans that we will put out to the communities. So you can draw your attention to that particular tab, as well as underneath the superintendent and assistant superintendent's messaging. We're also putting out the latest memos and information right there for you in bold, so you can access those pretty readily.
Great, thank you. And so we created a first FAQ, and that was really with key questions that had come into the school committee. And so there's a school committee FAQ sheet that's up online there. Our steering committee also is in the process. They collecting questions. I think we've got a little over 100 questions on that as well, and we're just in the process of answering those questions, and we'll put those up as well. Tonight was meant more for oral question and response. And so that's it tonight. Just a couple of quick, I guess, quick descriptions of how some of the work is being done across the district right now. We have a steering committee that's a kind of the broad overseer of the district, and you've got representatives on there from the three communities and the high school at the different grade levels as well. So we've got a Lancaster representative, a Bolton representative, and a Stowe representative, and then we ensured that each of our grade groupings was covered too. And on that particular committee also are union members, so there are teachers on there, and administrators, of course, as well as our parents. And then, so that oversees the broad, the 50,000 foot level, if you will, for reopening. Then there's a middle level of working groups that work kind of at the district office, but we're tapping into teachers to help us with that work as well. And you know, you'll hear Dr. McGuire tonight, for example, talk about the teaching and learning department and a lot of the work that's falling to that unit rate at this point in time. We also have a group that's working on busing and just general reopening logistics and operations. And of course, that's Rob Frieswick's area. And so there's a lot of work being done, as you can well imagine, in that area area right now. We also have a kind of a separate unit, a cohort of folks that are working on specific to SEL components. And Dr. McGuire will speak to that tonight as well, because we think that that's just such a critical component of our work as we move forward and attempt any reopening, whatever that reopening looks like. And then there are task forces that are at every building level, and that's really comprised of your site-based administration, teachers specific to that building, and parents specific to that building. We did tap into our school councils for a lot of the work that we're doing right now, so we want to thank all of them. I know Lori Burnett's on tonight too, and we thank her so much for, she's serving double duty because she sits on the high school team task force as well as a steering committee. So we're very appreciative of Lori taking on that effort. As we go through these questions tonight, the questions and answers, if questions come in that either Elaine is able to answer quickly and or Mike Tollefson will be able to answer, they'll ship out the answers ASAP to you. We will always, as we have done with the 3 previous forums, we have saved all of the chats to make sure that all the questions have been answered to the best of our ability. I'd also want to let you know that the answers that we give tonight could change in a heartbeat, because we have a drip of communication, and that's not negative, but that's just the reality that we're dealing with from the DESE. And of course, we have to follow their guidelines. And so, we may not have some answers tonight, and that's only because we're awaiting DESE guidance. And one of those areas, for example, is pre-K and K, that we are awaiting guidance from the DESE and EEC. So there's a lot of work right now that's kind of on hold with our youngest learners as we await guidance. And as much as I think the DESE feels that they're working as fast as they possibly can, and I'm sure that they are, but for us in the field, sometimes it feels like their answers are coming to us 3 and 4 weeks behind the time that we needed it. So we find that really frustrating, not a negative, because this is so hard for all of us to navigate, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher. There are so many unknowns, and there are for us too. I think it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge our parents tonight, because, we all went into this in March. If you'd asked us in March 5th, pick a day, whether March 13th we saw this coming, I think the answer would be no, none of us saw this coming. So a lot has happened between, March 13th and now. And we would tell you that we're aiming for that hybrid model. That's really what we're gunning for. But the reality is that we know that could change on a dime between now and September 16th. So we have no illusions that just because this is our goal, that this is exactly where we're going to land. In a perfect world, we would want a full return. And when we first started our work this summer, that's really what we were aiming for, is the full return. And then as the DESE guidance started to trickle through, and we started to do different feasibility studies in our buildings, particularly with measurements, and then when the DESE guidance came out for busing, and we started pulling this all together, we quickly realized that we couldn't do it without looking at, for example, the high school, without separating the high school into different buildings. And at that point in time, we were looking at different locations, and did we have different campuses for the high schools? That how we could do a full remote or full return. And that may still happen at some point in time of the year if we end up in a full return model. But at this point in time, that's not where we're aiming. We're aiming for the hybrid. However, it would be naive of us to say that this for sure is what's going to happen, because in all honesty, the governor could come down September 1st or September 10th and say everyone's going to full remote, and we would immediately have to pivot to go to full remote. So a lot of it depends on the trajectory of the COVID-19, where it's at that point in time as we get closer, draw closer to the physical start date for students. So we've been told over and over again by our commissioner that we need to be nimble, that we need to be ready to pivot at a moment's notice. And that kind of undergirds all of our thinking as we continue to work forward. couple of other things, and I think that you'll hear Dr. McGuire speak to one or two of these things too. We have a plan, basically a submission that we have to put into place tomorrow with the DESE, basically giving broad overview of the 3 different models, full return, full remote, and hybrid. And we've had to do a lot of work on that, but I feel very good that the work is ready. It's been completed. In fact, Dr. McGuire and I were just connecting before we came on stream to this particular meeting, and I think we're ready for a final review of it and then a submission tomorrow. Then we also are working in parallel with for an August 10th submission. And at this point in time, we see that August 10th submission being the full plan for the hybrid model. And the ESE is looking to basically give that their blessing to that. And they've told us that we should have that back by September 7th. So that kind of gives you some timelines of where the work is at. Another thing that I would point out to our parents as well is that SPED is really running on a completely different parallel pathway to whatever our pathway is that we take as a district, whether it's full return, hybrid, or full remote. And so the SPED has its own set of guidelines that it has to follow. And those guidelines are coming out right now from the DESE through either the commissioner's office and or Russell Johnson's office. And those come out relatively sporadically. For example, we got fresh guidance out one Friday night before the Monday start of the extended school year. And we had to make changes that weekend before we could start and bring our students back in the Monday morning. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that's at play. PPE was another thing that we had to make sure that we had in place before we could start. Our PPE is now in place, ready to go for the either full return or hybrid return. I give all credit to Lisa Gilbicki. I'm not sure if she's on. I don't see her.
She's with us.
Is she on with us? Okay, thank you. Lisa Gilbicki is our nurse leader extraordinaire. She's amazing, and she worked very closely with Rob Frieswick and Pat Maroney early in the game to make sure that we were well stocked. When I think a lot of people weren't even thinking about ordering, our orders had already been placed and the shipments were starting to come in. We had problems near the end there with the gowns because gowns were so hard to come by, but we now have 62 cases of gowns, so we're prepared for gowns as well. So I think that I want to go back to SPED for a minute too. I think that you'll see that a different type of dissemination of information will come out regarding SPED. Last night, Joan DeAngelis presented for the school committee, as did Tanya Rich for the athletics, and Raina Rago for the extended learning. That was last night's presentation of the school committee. Rob Frieswick is not able to be on tonight, and so I'm going to pick up his questions just briefly. I won't do nearly as good a job as Rob would do, but with Nikki faithfully recording all of our sessions, if you don't hear the answer exactly and you're looking for a little bit more detail, feel free to go back and take a look at Tuesday night's recordings, and you can certainly listen to Rob's presentation. And his is ready. We did that purposely at the very beginning, so you can go in and listen to the exact same questions and the answers that Rob gave on Tuesday night. We'll start with those questions, and then we will move to questions that are linked to Lisa, and then Todd and I will start to work our way through. So keep in mind that there's an FAQ sheet already up on the website already of frequently asked questions that came into school committee. The steering committee is I'd say about 3/4 done. It will probably be able to be up sometime next week. We were hoping to get it up this week, but the submission really took our efforts here for the submission that's due tomorrow. So we'll hopefully have that up as well. Keep in mind, again, I'm going to say this again, that we will not have all of the answers. There are things where the questions have come up and the answers are, we don't have an answer yet. Most often that's because we are waiting guidance to come through DSE, and or we'll give you an answer and say, this is what we think the answer is right at this point in time, unless DESE comes forward with something else. We also want to talk, Todd, if we can just talk remote versus, the April, May, June type thing, as opposed to coming back. And so if you could just touch base on, the fact that what we'll be going into for remote in September is substantially different than how we left the year. So do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I know we have a number of remote learning questions. I'm sure I'll certainly get to that with those questions that we have, but we certainly will have a different remote learning than we had in the spring. And I know we have a number of questions around that, so I'll address that when we get to those questions and the difference between the two.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks.
So I think with that, let's start in with the questions. And again, thank you to all the parents that are on tonight. We just really appreciate you being here. And I know that some of our high school staff is on tonight, so we thank you for joining us as well. So we'll start with the questions that would normally have gone to Rob, but I'll do the best I can tonight.
The first questions have to do with facilities. And the first question is, in the conversation regarding air exchange in the schools, there was discussion regarding the state's recommendation that buildings be equipped with filters with a MERV rating of 13. What exactly is that level? And is the plan at Florence Sawyer and all of our other schools to change the filters monthly in order to reach the highest level possible?
So a couple quick things on that. Most of the schools across the Commonwealth are actually MERV ratings between 8 and 10, and those are normally that's normally the ratings that we're working at. We have to be cautious in that rating. And again, I don't understand this, but Rob could certainly explain in much greater detail. And if you listen to Tuesday night, I think you'll hear that. I don't think that you'll see us be able to get up as high as 13. The MERV range is between 8 and 16. I don't think that our schools can all hit 13, but we're certainly aiming for 10. In terms of changes of filters and such, not all schools are run that way, but all of our schools, since I've come on stream here, are all on maintenance plans right now, and proactive maintenance plans for our HVAC systems. And so any that have had filters have already been changed and are all set for September.
Great. Next question has to do with the HVAC systems. What options are available and being considered for bringing fresh outside air into our facilities, be it passively through open windows or actively within the HVAC system intake itself?
Right. So each of our schools has the ability to bring in the fresh air from the outside through the HVAC systems. So we've been looking at, for example, having these run, for example, all night long, so that it brings the fresh air into the buildings through the night, so that the mornings are all fresh. That's one of the things that we're looking at. Obviously, just simple things like making sure that windows are open extensively throughout the buildings, especially during the fall. I think you'll see a lot of that kind of simple thing happen as well.
Water safety. With the prolonged shutdown for facilities from March through September 2020, how is the school addressing concerns regarding the CDC's occupancy guidance related to Legionnaire's disease?
And I think it goes beyond the Legionnaire disease as well. I think it's much broader. And I think what people probably don't know is that once we closed the buildings, that didn't mean that in our world as the administration, that custodians weren't going in and out of those buildings, because they were, and they were running water. And so it wasn't that and in part to keep it fresh, to keep things from drying out. So when custodians went into our buildings, they were running water, flushing toilets, that kind of thing. And they have continued to do that. And then of course, as soon as they were able to get in there to start the heavy duty cleaning, the deep cleaning, the summer cleaning that happens, of course, there was lots of water run at that point in time. So the buildings have not remained stagnant. And I think sometimes people, how would you know if we didn't tell you? Actually, that's not what happened. Our buildings continue to stay alive with activity.
The next question has to do with air conditioning and was really focused around Florence Sawyer, but what are fans going to be used to and provided to cool classrooms down, particularly when it's hard to focus when it's 90 degrees out, and let alone now wearing masks in any of our buildings.
And I think I want to put this right up front as well. There is nothing natural about anything that we're doing right now. Like, none of this feels natural or feels good, that as we move into a hybrid model. Nothing is going to feel good like returning to a full return. Everything else feels unnatural to us. You know, and the notion of keeping masks on all day in really hot schools is not, that's not a good thought for us. So I think that one of the things that we are considering right now is looking at heat indexes in our buildings. Most of our buildings are air conditioned, but we have concerns with the Bolton campus, obviously, because it isn't air conditioned. And if you've been on that top floor, honestly, during those really hot days, I mean, I remember we've taken in ice water, we've taken in damp towels to that, and none of that can happen right now. So we may find ourselves in a position where we're actually going to have to close that school down as a result of heat index. So we'll continue to monitor and let you know how that's going. Now, I also want to say too, these were questions that came in district-wide for all schools. And so we wanted to make sure that we were consistent in responding to all of these questions. So even though it might say Florence Sawyer, we would want you to know that we're considering all of this right across the district. It wasn't specific, because we thought if it came into us, it was a good question to not just ask of one building. It was a good question to ask of all of our buildings. So even though it says Florence Sawyer in this particular question, we really are looking at that heat index right across the buildings. For example, you know, it's in Stowe, I think it was last year, our air conditioning went down. That could still happen, you know. So even though our buildings are air conditioned, we don't know if something might go down. So I think that that's one of the reasons why we're looking and saying, what is the heat index and when do we shut the buildings down? So more to follow on that.
Has it been discussed to put in the special lighting that kills germs?
So that was something that we've had discussion and done some research in, but at the end of the day, honestly, it is far too cost prohibitive for us to go and put in a system like that in any of our buildings. So at this point in time, even though we looked into it and did a good amount of research on it, ultimately we decided against it.
So we're going to move on to Lisa, answer some of our questions related to health and safety. The first one, in the school committee conversation, in her memo, the superintendent mentioned that the school committee does not feel that the 3-foot minimum recommended by the state is sufficient. What does that mean exactly for students and teachers?
So for students and teachers, physical distance greatly reduces the risk of transmission. In general, 6 feet, I apologize ahead of time. The sun keeps coming across. I'm in my new house and I have no blinds yet. So I'm going to keep moving as the sun comes.
Well, we get to see the house. It's all good.
Problems that I have right now. I have no place to go here. Sorry. Apologize. In general, 6 feet is the recommended distance between individuals where feasible. The minimum distance required is 3 feet, which is medically permitted where wearing a mask in schools. But the Neshoba Regional School District just feels that 3 feet is not enough. We really want to extend that to really optimize our safety for our students. Therefore, we're working on plans to maintain 6 feet apart to the best of our abilities within the school setting as much as we can.
Thanks, Lisa. Next question. What are the district's or state's guidelines for when schools should reopen in person or when they would close again if the data suggests rising risk? Also, according to COVID Act Now, the COVID threat level in Massachusetts has just increased to at risk. If we reopen in a hybrid model, is there an increase in risk level which would cause the district to move to all remote? And if so, what can you tell us about metrics the district is watching and how would this be decided?
Yeah, so I continuously watch the metrics on a daily basis, believe it or not, and I also connect with DPH and also our local Board of Health. We don't always make that decision. Obviously, we make it collaboratively with local officials, our admin team, based on the data, public health officials, DPH, the CDC, DESE guidelines, and obviously the governor would make some decisions on that as well. So this isn't a Neshoba Regional School District decision. It's a collaborative decision that's made how we move back and forth from hybrid to remote.
Great. Next question. I understand that if we are to be in school in person, the level of disinfectant is required in this era of COVID-19. However, it does raise new potential concerns. What are the risks for creation of or transmission of resistant superbugs, such as MRSA?
So this was a really great question that I consulted with our school-based physician, Dr. Russell Coleman, and his response was, because I didn't really know the answer, obviously, to this, And he said the risk was low for that. Antibiotics are more of an issue because the bacteria can develop mutations that allow them to handle the antibiotics. He has seen some reports from what he said of bacteria in hospitals developing some tolerance of alcohol, but not total resistance. This is why we often use other products for cleaning in classrooms, which is what we're doing at Neshoba Regional School District.
There's been a lot of talk about the state decision not to require face masks for kindergarten through grade 1. Is this being discussed internally? If face masks were to be required for our young students, our family would likely choose to do virtual schooling.
So this is definitely something that we've been discussing, as well as Superintendent Clunchy, as well with other superintendents across the district. It was on the agenda for last evening's, I should say, school committee meeting. Many school districts in the Commonwealth of Mass are moving to require face coverings for all K through 12 students, and we are moving in that same direction. The safety of all students.
Great. For sick policies, are teachers and students going to constantly get COVID tested and quarantined once the flu and cold season hit?
This is, again, another one of those hard questions to answer because it depends on the symptoms, exposure, and where they've been. As a supplement to DESE's initial fall school reopening guidance, protocols for responding to COVID scenarios in schools, on the bus, in the community were provided to us on July 17th in collaboration with the CDC and the medical group team. It really depends on the protocol and scenario if testing is required. So yes, there will be some increase in testing or requirements of testing in order to return. If students or staff choose not to be tested, then they would have to be quarantined. They also provide us with 9 guidelines and protocols for individuals with exposure and those that were potential school closures. So it really depends on what the exposure was.
Thanks, Lisa.
Todd, I think you missed number 23.
COVID testing, specifically rapid and frequent testing for faculty, particularly those who live in towns with higher COVID rates. How will this be addressed for safety of students and faculty?
That question is another great question. It really refers to universal testing, and universal testing refers to testing all students and staff in school settings for COVID, regardless of whether they are showing symptoms or not. And that's what the question is asking. According to the latest reports from the CDC, which was dated July 24th, they do not recommend universal testing of all students and staff for several reasons. I'm only going to name a few. One of them is viral testing only provides, or universal testing, COVID-19 status for individuals at the time of testing. So we could test them today, 2 days later, they would be positive. So it really doesn't give us good numbers. One-time or universal entry testing could miss COVID-19 cases in the early stages of infection, kind of repeating the same thing. I test now, but my symptoms are going to start 2 days from now, and then I'm going to be positive. So that's the reason why the CDC doesn't recommend doing that at this point.
Now, Elaine, I saw a question pop up, and I think that Lisa can address it right away, if you don't mind. Not that normally we don't do it like this, but just because Lisa's right here, she can respond to the question right away.
You see, Lisa, it's what types of PPE will teachers and staff be required to wear?
Can you repeat it again? I'm sorry.
What types of PPE will teachers and staff be required to wear?
It depends on what type of classroom and student population they have. That's a really great question. So I will speak with nurses first. Nurses are going to be required to be in full PPE if there's a suspected COVID symptoms with staff and students. Classroom teachers will only require a mask. There should not be any gloves worn at that time, and that's going to be part of our training when we come back for those 10 days prior. Really talking about when we should have PPE on and when we should not. However, for those that are going to be in close contact with students that are unable to wear a mask all day for other medical reasons or emotional reasons, we may require more than just a face mask. We may require a shield and gloves. We would also require a little bit more full PPE when we're talking about toileting students at the pre-K level. So that's a great question, but it really depends, and the training will all be done prior to return to school.
Great. So Todd, let's go back down and we'll start question number 1. Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
When will parents get their child scheduled for the hybrid model? As a family with 2 working parents who can't work from home, this is huge importance to us.
And this, I think this is meant more for the middle and elementary students and not than the high school students. But we're aiming to try to get this out around, early to mid-August. There are a lot of efforts that are being put into creating the cohorts, and we'll talk about that as we go through our questions here. So, we know how important it is that our parents want to know exactly, what cohort their child is in. So we absolutely understand that. So we'll get it out as soon as we can. But I would want you to know that the principals and their administrative teams are working on those right now.
How will students be organized if we move to a hybrid model?
So that's also a great question. And I think really what we're trying to do first, the first priority is to try to keep students in their family, in the family unit, so that the families know that, like, on Monday and Tuesday, for example, all of my children will be at school during that time frame. So family first, and within that, elementary and middle first, and then we're trying to make sure that if there's a high school child that's in that family as well, that we're trying to make sure that that's tied into. The other thing that we're looking at too is, we know that this is not natural, this is not normal, and we think that students are probably going to need a friend, that they can count on in their classrooms as well. So that's something that is being considered right across the district. We're going to continue to work away at that, and as I say, the administrative team is working on that right now.
If a family were to elect to begin the year under NSD remote, would it be possible to transfer them back to a hybrid later in the year?
And the answer is
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
A rotating schedule would be extremely difficult for 2 parents working out of the home and figuring out childcare. Will the schedule rotate?
So the answer to that is that that's one of the reasons why we took a very dramatically different approach to our scheduling this year. Our elementary and middle schools, for example, have been running on a 6-day cycle. Our high school has been running on an 8-day cycle. And so we took a look, as did a lot of school districts, I would say most, if not all, and took a look to say, should we be revamping this? And so we did, and especially with the notion of going to a hybrid model, because the notion of trying to arrange childcare on a rotating schedule just seemed completely unwieldy, and we couldn't imagine what that would look like. So we've put all of our middle and elementary schools on the 5-day cycle, and I think that they've done that relatively successfully, and the high school is working on the 5-day cycle as well. And so those are dramatic shifts. That was a mammoth undertaking for our school district leadership members to work through. And I think that the high school has probably got as much of a shell and skeleton in place now. I would also suggest too that we all started with a focus on our cores and building around the cores. The high school may not see as many electives as offered as they have in the past, but it's not fine-tuned yet. They're just working really, really hard at that. So as soon as we can get you news on that, we'll make sure that we ship that out to you.
Will K through 2 students have access to a device from the district? And the answer is yes. Similar to the spring, we will provide devices for students who need them. K through 2 students work on iPads mostly, and so we're able to provide loaners for any students in the district who need a loaner, whether it be students K through 12 or at any level. The next question: how will social distancing be handled in the middle and high schools when kids change classrooms?
And these and 10 also kind of allude to these.
Yeah, will kids stay put, and will kids move in lined up pods with the same kids all day long?
Right. And so, we've looked at our elementary and middle schools. I think we've been able to relatively successfully keep students pretty much status quo throughout the day without a lot of movement. We've tried really, really hard to try to minimize the movement wherever we can, because of course that's recommendation from both DESE and CDC. So we've tried really, really hard. At the high school though, it's a much bigger issue for us. And that's also one of the reasons why, we took a look at the hybrid model. I mean, there are many reasons why we went to the hybrid model, but that was one of the reasons. And we thought often about the high school and just trying to keep the sheer volume of students down at the high school level. So we're still looking at that. Again, the schedule, it may change between tonight and tomorrow, or tonight and Tuesday. So not ready to put anything out there yet. But I think that you'll see that we've tried really hard to minimize, but at the high school level, it wasn't possible for us to keep all children, all of our students in the exact same place for the whole thing.
The next two questions are similar, and the question is really about, can serious consideration be made to keep siblings in the same household, in the same family, on the same schedule? And the answer is yes. We'll be putting kids into cohorts, so family members will be in the same cohort, so the kids aren't on different schedules. So all members within the same household will be in the same hybrid cohort model. Could you please confirm that NRSD will offer a remote learning option? And this is what you alluded to earlier, Brooke. So the question is, yes, we will be providing a remote learning option, and it will be far more comprehensive than the spring. Keeping in mind that when we left in the spring, it was very abrupt. And so we didn't have a lot of time to, get things up and running. And when you offer a remote learning option and you ask teachers to be able to provide remote learning for students, you need to provide them professional development to do that, as well as students. So we took our time in the spring to make sure that we could provide that professional development and two-way communication, and also provide for the safety of students in an online learning model. So our remote learning option in the fall will be far more robust. We're offering remote learning academies. Those remote learning academies will be school-based, so that students at a particular school will be in the remote learning model at that school, so they can still feel a part of that community. So that's our big focus. We'll talk more about balance of learning, asynchronous learning versus synchronous learning a little bit later on tonight. But we will offer a remote learning option, and anyone is eligible to go into that model should they opt to do so.
14 and 15 have been answered.
Yep. Is there a way to request a reassignment after things have been set if their days don't work for a family due to care, work, or no friends within their classes?
So that's a tough one to respond to right now, because if you think about the fact that we've got over 3,000 students in our district right now, the notion of trying to work around everybody's individual daycare situation or whatever it's almost impossible. So I think that our principals are trying very, very hard to get this right out of the gate. So they're spending a lot of time being really thoughtful right now with the class configurations, particularly more at that elementary and middle school level, in terms of the cohorts, so that there isn't, because that's where, of course, where the childcare component comes in more than our high school. So I think that you're seeing them be very, very thoughtful and strategic as they configure those classrooms right now.
Next question has will come up several times tonight. Will the school calendar be revised to equalize in-person school time for each cohort? I am going. And the answer is yes. If everyone could please mute their microphones, that would be super helpful to us so that we can be clear. Thank you.
Hello, green peppers. This is a modern day Victory Garden.
She's muted.
Okay, thank you. So will the school calendar be revised to equalize in-person school time for each cohort? So in other words, if option 3 is selected, can professional development days be moved to Wednesdays so it does not impact either cohort? We are looking at each week of the school year, and we will certainly move around the schedule so that there is equal time for each cohort in the building per week. So if there is a Monday holiday, we will move the schedule so that each cohort is in at least 2 days a week, regardless of the situation. With regard to a fully remote option, could you hold an information session giving parents more specific information or a chance to fully preview that remote learning prior to making a decision? So the answer to that is yes. And we're certainly gonna look to our building level task forces to be holding information sessions and providing information for parents as it relates to building specific learning modules for the fall. So we certainly are open to holding information sessions and giving more specific information as those models are developed.
Thanks. We've answered number 19, but can I just jump on that just for half a minute here? Your task force at the high school right now has, I believe, over 30 people. And like many of the other schools as well, they're breaking up their task forces and into different components with different foci so that we're trying to be as efficient with the workload because there's so much to accomplish in such a short period of time. But you've got a tremendous task force, and it just as an FYI too, on those task forces at your school building level, you also have school committee members that are sitting on there, as well as the parents, teachers, and administrators. So I think you've got a nice, and I've looked at your grouping. You've got a really nice grouping in your high school right now too for your task force. 20.
Okay. Drop off and pick up. It looks like about 36% of parents may drive their children to and from school instead of using the bus. Assuming this is much more than normal school years, what protocols need to be in place for traffic control, safety, and efficiency?
So that's a great question, and we've done a lot of thinking on that. I think we're really blessed because we have great relationships with our safety partners, our police, and of course at the high school, we've got our own SRO, and we're very grateful for that. So I think that you'll see, our efforts and our partnership with them come into play here. I also think too, part of this stat comes from one of the surveys that we did, and you'll see us do at least one more survey before we start because we know that parents are going to change their mind. And, I've received a number of emails after the first survey saying, is this binding? No, it's not binding right now. We know that we expect and respect the fact that you're going to change your mind 3 or 4 times between now and September 16th. We understand that. And that's probably going to hold true for the busing as well. I'm also appreciative of the fact that I received a number of emails from parents that said, if you need us to drive our children, we're happy to do that. If you need the bus room for others. And so very respectful of those kinds of emails when they came in as well. So that might be where the 36% was there when we did that survey at that time. We expect that number may change. So like everything, so it wasn't binding, but we needed some more definitive benchmarks to work from. And so that's one of the reasons why we did the survey, that was the last survey that when we did it.
We've been in town for 6 years, but this is our first year with the school system with an incoming kindergartner. Will there be an option for an in-person or virtual visit for our son to see the school classroom and teacher prior to the start of the school year?
So I know that this question is really about kindergarten, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about it just briefly tonight too, because I think for us, it's not just about K, it's about the pre-K, the K, the children going into grade 6 and our freshmen. These are all children that are going into buildings that they may never have been in. And so we're acutely aware of that. And we want to make sure that there's a nice phase in for those students here so that they're more and more comfortable as they start to get into this. And that's one of the reasons why we were hoping so much that we can stay with a hybrid model, because we think that, and not start with full remote, although we understand that that's a possibility. But as Dr. McGuire had alluded to earlier, some of these students, this is really hard for them because they're transitioning into buildings where there's no relationships, there's no knowledge of where the restrooms are, where the classrooms are, all of that kind of stuff. So we're thinking about that constantly and trying to find a way and figure our way through to make this situation easier for those that are transitioning in to the new buildings.
Okay, number 25.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've done number 24. Yeah.
Number 26 comes from parents asking how they can help. We recognize that this is a major undertaking for the district. While there are a couple hundred faculty, we assume there are thousands of parents, small or big. How can we help you in your ongoing efforts to make the most out of this school year?
And that was our favorite question. So we don't know who sent that question, but we thank you so much. And to be honest, it wasn't the only email that we got in saying, what can we do to help? And we have amazing parents across the school district, and we've had a number of those kinds of emails come into us. And so we wanted to make sure that we put that, even though it's not, it is a question, but it's not a typical question. We wanted to make sure we put that out there just so that we could acknowledge the fact that so many of you have sent those kinds of notes into us, and we thank you so much for that. The truth is, we don't know at this point in time if we're going to need more of your help, and so we know where to find you. And if we need more help, we will certainly not feel afraid to reach out to you.
The next two questions, will there be a 6-foot distance or will there be a distance between 3 and 6 feet?
And we've kind of addressed that as well.
Okay. I've heard you discuss live synchronous learning and would like to know more about what that entails. Will the students be watching a live feed of the classroom? So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of remote learning, we really work to, provide synchronous learning in the spring as fast as we could. And synchronous learning really means that one-on-one, two-way communication between teacher and student and really live learning. We're continuing to beef that up. We're looking at having multiple platforms, Google Meet, Zoom as well. And we're certainly looking at balancing synchronous learning with asynchronous learning, which has students kind of off screen time, working on projects, working on papers and those kinds of things, so that we can balance that screen time as well. But when kids are in the classroom, the 2 days a week, that will be all synchronous learning. That will be in the classroom face-to-face with teachers and their peers. And then we are certainly looking to balance that synchronous learning when they're at home. Will the students be watching a live feed? We're looking at all sorts of avenues, from doc cams to the bandwidth that we have within our buildings, to be able to tape lessons, put them in Google Classrooms, put them online, as well as potentially live stream classes. So we're really working on that and working with a variety of districts in terms of what they're doing. Will remote learners have a different teacher than in-person learners?
So all of that is being worked on right now, and I think that it's too soon for us to go down that road right now, because we are really not sure. We're not sure what our staffing is going to look like right now as we sit here July 30th. A lot of things can happen between now and September 16th. So, for example, we sent a letter out this afternoon to all of our staffs, suggesting that if they were thinking about needing any type of leave or anything like that, now's the time that they need to contact HR and start to work through the process. So, we don't really know as we sit here tonight exactly who's going to be back and who isn't going to be back. So that's still a large unknown for us. So at this point in time, it's way too soon to make any promises about or any guarantees about any teachers doing the work. And Todd, I think we've answered 35, 36, so we can go to 37.
Would our children's teachers be developing and sharing content and activities with each other, whether through pre-recorded videos, independent work, building on in-person time, or other means? And the answer to that is yes. We certainly have been given 10, professional development days at the start of the year. So we're working very hard on allowing for tremendous collaboration amongst our teachers in providing consistency across grade level and across disciplines within the district, so that kids in multiple towns are receiving the same experience. We're also working on prioritizing the standards and benchmarks at each grade level and in each discipline, so that when prioritized, those can really be handled and focused on when kids are in the building, as well as when they are remote. But we are certainly focused on providing as much PD for teachers so that they can work together, collaborate, and create constant, consistent expectations and experiences for all kids. Would our children's own teachers be giving them feedback on this remote work in some way, whether it's through a remote platform such as Seesaw or Google Classroom, or during in-person sessions? And the answer is yes. Whatever teacher a child has, be it at the high school, it'll be those teachers who are giving feedback based upon their work, whether they're in the classroom, whether they're in the hybrid model, at school or remote. Students will be receiving feedback from the teachers who they have been assigned to.
You've answered number 39, so I think you can go to 40.
I'm wondering how the district will plan in order to minimize the impact of too much screen time. Will teachers be able to give students the option to complete some assignments by hand instead of on a computer? And I mentioned this earlier, we are really working on that balance. We understand that, screen time, particularly in a remote model, is a lot. It's part of the reason why we chose this hybrid model, because it gets every kid in the district in school every week. And so we know that when they're in school, in person, there'll be far less screen time because we'll be focused on that one-to-one synchronous teaching and learning. So we're really focused on reducing the screen time, particularly when kids are at remote, and trying to balance the synchronous and asynchronous time, particularly when they're at home. And will they be able to provide students with activities that can be done offline? Absolutely. In remote learning, whether all remote or hybrid, to what extent will students be required to follow a schedule? This was a really great question. It was a question we actually put in our surveys, and the overwhelming feedback was that parents, students, teachers wanted a schedule, particularly in remote. So when kids are in the building, they're certainly going to follow a schedule as they normally do. But the feedback we got was that people want some sort of a schedule when kids are at home as well. And so we're in the process now. We've got meetings with our principals coming up this week and next to really drill down on what those schedules will look like and really balancing that synchronous versus asynchronous learning at home so that students aren't on a device all day long. With that schedule being built in, there'll certainly be a balanced way of learning through a schedule when kids are at home. And that'll also include social emotional learning activities and other authentic ways that we can engage students off of the computer.
I think you can jump to 47.
47. During the school committee meeting, it was discussed that Chromebooks had been sourced for grades 3 through 12. Is there any intention of providing devices for grades K through 2? If not, what was the reasoning behind that decision? And will parents with children in K to 2 be expected to purchase a device for their child? So we will be providing devices for all students K through 12. Currently, we have enough devices, Chromebooks, particularly for our grades 3 through 12. Those students work on Chromebooks. Our kindergartners through grade 2 work on iPads, and that has everything to do with keystrokes and executive functionings for those youngsters. They're not quite ready for a Chromebook or a keyboard just yet when they're in school. So we will be able to provide devices for any students in K through 2 who need them. But certainly, I know this is a high school audience tonight. So just like in the spring, if there's an issue with the Chromebook, we'll be able to take the Chromebook in, send it out to get fixed, and provide a loaner in the meantime, should a student need one.
50.
We have family in other schools in the area, and they were informed that recess was going to be eliminated for kids. Is this something that the Neshoba district is planning on? We feel that recess or even free time is a vital part of education and would not support eliminating these kinds of things.
So I'll just take that quickly. I know that recess really doesn't apply to necessarily the high school level, but some of you may well have students at that middle school level, elementary. So we're going to respond to it anyway. There have been no final decisions made in that. There's discussion that's ongoing. We too feel strongly that it's a vital component to child's growth and well-being. So we're trying to navigate our way through to what a healthy recess could look like. And I think, Todd, we're on to 57.
57. Many things you see online from theoretical teachers talk about kids being in seats all day and teachers not being able to approach to help students. While I understand the need for social distancing, I also understand the need for children to have interaction with each other. What is envisioned to help our youngest students and even all of our students have a positive introduction to our school system?
And I think that's one of the reasons why we're aiming for the hybrid model, because it allowed more room. When we took a look at the full return model and measured out every classroom in our district, it really did box in our teachers and it boxed in our children, and it showed to a way that just would have been so unhealthy. And so we feel much better that through the hybrid model, there will be more movement allowed. And so in an unnatural environment, it's going to feel a little bit more natural by having that additional space.
Are children going to have to eat sitting alone?
The answer is yes. That's and we've been playing with different configurations at the high school of what this could look like at the high school. Not that we've landed anywhere on this, but for example, we've talked about removing all of the tables and bringing desks in and marking out the cafeteria in the 6-foot marks so that, friends could kind of sit at 6-foot distances, but they not at a table. So the answer in short is yes, they're going to have to sit away because they're going to have their masks off. So it's going to have to be at the 6-foot distance.
What is happening with art, computers, music, library, and gym?
So that's a great question, and I don't think that we have solid answers as we sit here tonight. We just received new guidance, I think, Wednesday night on this. Um, it's a struggle for us, quite frankly, to work our way through this. For example, art. Whether it's art at the high school level or whether it's a grade 2 student, we're trying to minimize any sharing of supplies and such. So that's a real challenge for us as we work our way through this. The music, the choral and band, I think, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the DESE guidance was that we could do it if it was at 10 foot away outside, and what we could bring in a tent. And first of all, tents are hard to come by, and it's not from the show, but it's not even a school-based thing. It's just that tents right now are short supply because they're being used everywhere else in hospitals and different COVID testing centers and that kind of thing. So they're not easy for us to get. I understand that it makes sense that that's something that we could do, but really it's something that, even though we can do it, I don't think we possibly can do it. The other thing too, that there is a cost factor involved with tents. They run about $25,000 per 3 months. And if you can imagine, if we try to do this at every building, it's just cost prohibitive. The one thing I would say, knowing our art teachers and our band and choral teachers, I'm willing to bet that they will come up with something incredibly creative that I probably could never think of. So they're incredibly innovative people. So we'll see what they come up with. Um, Physical education, I think at the high school level, we're looking at just revamping that course. And I'm not looking for Steve to necessarily weigh in right now, but I think you'll see us put more of a focus on fitness and probably bring some health components into that course as well. Libraries, right now, as we sit here tonight, July 30th, I think a lot of things could change between now and September 16th, but we're questioning whether we will even have libraries open at this point in time. So I'm not sure that we have an answer for you tonight on libraries at all. And that kind of wraps up, I think, that question,
Yep.
Todd.
Can children go to the bathroom when they need to? And the simple answer is absolutely always yes.
67.
Yep. Are backpacks or any personal belongings allowed from home? How do school supplies work?
So at this point in time, we're still working through that. I think that's one of those things that as we get closer to the date, you'll see more information come out on this. We're also expecting more information for guidance to come out from DESE specific to this. So more to follow on that. We don't have answers tonight on that.
If teachers have to be 6 feet from children, how can real learning or helping a child read or solve a math problem happen?
And that gets back to one of the reasons why we're looking at the hybrid model, because it will allow greater movement for our staff and students with a hybrid that wasn't feasible with a full return.
If teachers are out sick, do we have substitutes to cover classrooms?
Yes.
How can we physically keep these children apart when they haven't seen each other or been around other kids in months?
And we couldn't agree more, and we have no clear guidelines on that as we sit here, because we know that children are excited to see each other, and so so are our adults going to be excited to see each other because we've been apart for so long. And as much as we all Zoom and have these, it's not the same as actually physically being on site working with each other. And I know that we find, even with central offices personnel, sometimes nuances get lost in Zoom meetings that we would be able to pick up on if we were at central office. So there are a lot of things that are missing in our world right now. But I think that we don't have any clear guidance and clear answers right now of how we are going to be able to physically keep these children apart at the 6 foot level. I think the other thing that we want to point out is that we need help. This is an area we need help from with our communities and our parents. Even as I watch my granddaughter here, who's getting very used to wearing her unicorn mask that she loves so much. These are things that have to start at the home. And I think that if children are wearing their masks now, it's going to be so much easier when they go to wear it come September. So, and I think we have to talk about and educate our children on the 6 foot distance at home so that it becomes a little bit more normalized when they come into the buildings. But yeah, that's going to be a really tough one for us. There's no two ways about it.
I'll take the next question around emotional support. Will there be emotional support for children when they come back? And that's a really important question. We recognize that when children went out, and we all went out in March, there were already established connections. So it was easier to communicate with teachers because everybody knew each other. So we definitely recognize the need that there will be to make established connections between teachers and students together. So we are working tremendously on building an emotional support and a social emotional learning support system for our students, as well as resources and activities and a curriculum. It's part of the reason why we're choosing this model, so that when everybody is remote at home on Wednesdays, we can build in those social emotional learning supports for everybody when they're at home in a remote model. We know we have some schools already that are planning and implementing advisory programs, resiliency programs. So we're certainly focused on the SEL component, and recognize that it is so important given that students have been out of school for so long.
We would tease you and tell you that you're frozen again, because it's always, you're frozen at
This is what happens.
about this point
It's
in
a
time.
sign.
In our phones.
All right,
So,
well, I'm going to keep talking and just shut my video off. How's that?
that's great.
And
So,
I won't look foolish with a weird face, but that's okay.
The other thing too, I would say, is your high school is doing, well, let me, before I go into the high school, throughout the district, I mean, we're looking at implementing different things at the different grade groupings. So the elementary, we're looking very differently at, obviously, because there are different needs, right, that we're looking at meeting. And then the middle school. The high school I'm particularly excited about, though, because I think that your guidance department is doing some really unique, thoughtful, strategic planning that is just really, really exciting. So I'm excited to see where the high school ultimately lands. And I think at some point in time, we're not ready to roll it out right now, but I think that you'll see the guidance department at the high school provide a focus on just the work that they're doing in that area.
Is it possible for parents and children to communicate with their teachers prior to school?
There'll be opportunities, probably likely within that initial 10-day period, because I think that we're going to look at doing a number of different things during that initial period leading up to September 16th.
The next three questions are all around assessment and grading. How's that being done? Will students receive assessment tests, assessments? If children fall behind, what resources are in place? So keep in mind, when we went remote in the spring, we went to a pass-fail model. That is not the case this fall. We're going back to the traditional assessment, and that students will be accountable for the work, as well as teachers will be accountable for providing consistent and thorough feedback. We're focused on providing formative assessments along the way so that teachers can identify where students are at before providing any sort of summative assessment or summative project. And when children fall behind, that's part of what we're building into our remote model, so that there are office hours and ways that students can communicate with their teachers and get supplemental help, get enrichment during the process. So we're really focused in those PD days. We'll really be focused too around assessment as well as feedback. You know, when we got feedback in our surveys from family members, we certainly got some feedback that said teachers were giving phenomenal feedback and some teachers weren't giving much feedback at all. So we really want to streamline that and make that pretty consistent across the district. But grading will be how it's been in the past, and not on a pass-fail. Will start times be staggered to alleviate pickup and drop-off issues? Is there any plan in place to deal with more parents utilizing pickup and drop-off to make it run more smoothly?
So a couple of quick things on that. I think we'll wait till we get a little bit closer. One of the things I will tell you, though, you know, right now we don't think we will have to be staggered. When we were first looking at a full return model, we probably would have been. But I would also tell you that the high school schedule, as they're looking at it, building it differently than, because we always try to give the high school a little bit more autonomy, because it's kind of its own, its very own building and very different approach than our other schools are. And so they have a little bit more autonomy. And I think that you're going to see, for example, when the schedule ultimately comes out, that they're looking at the potential for doing a different type of dismissal. That's not in stone right now, but but that's in the shell of the schedule as they continue to build it. So it might not be a staggered start time, but it might be a staggered dismissal time across the district. And I think, Todd, you can go to 87.
At the high school, will my student be able to take classes he or she is registered for at the levels they've registered for, such as honors, accelerated, college prep, and advanced placement, whether we choose remote or hybrid? And the answer is yes. Regardless of the level, that is the class that will be provided, whether the student is in a hybrid model or a remote model. We recognize that some electives, given that we're moving to a 5-day schedule from the high school to the high school, from what was a more days in the schedule, that some electives may not be offered or may have to be staggered. But certainly in terms of content specific, those levels will be offered, as well as advanced placement courses. Advanced placement has made some changes. They did all of their tests online this past spring. You may see that happen moving forward because it was successful, and the College Board will set their guidelines as it relates to advanced placement. But we'll certainly be offering the same levels of classes for students at the high school.
88.
How will who will teach remote classes? I think we already covered that one.
Yeah.
Will it be the same teachers who are teaching the in-school classes? And that's no. There'll be a set of teachers who are teaching the remote within the school. How will the hybrid plan work at the high school with switching classes? Students are all taking different classes at different levels. Will they switch classes like normal? If so, will classrooms be cleaned well enough with not much time between classes?
And that's something that we're looking at right now. We don't have an answer as we're sitting here tonight, but please know that we've had a lot of discussion on that and are looking to try to find our way through that. Rob has been working very closely with the custodians. Rob Frieswick, our director of facilities, has been working very closely with the custodians. So we'll see what the plan is that they're able to find their way through to on that.
And finally, with the 2-week delay of school opening, will the first day of school be Monday, 9/14?
And the answer is no. The first day for students will actually be September 16th. And that's really come down from the DESE. They were looking at September 16th as a kind of a more of a universal day across the state, and especially with the 10 days up front. They were insistent that those 10 days be up front. We couldn't play with them and, for example, put them throughout the school year. We had to use those days right up front. So that's exactly what we've done. Now, with that, I know that there are some other questions, and I don't know if I did see Jody. I haven't scrolled through, so I'm not sure if Jody Speck is still on, but I think she may be able to answer one or two of the questions if she's on. I'm not sure if she's able to unmute herself, if she's still here. And Steve Colonnane is on. He should still be on, and he may actually have a response. But again, if we don't have the answers, we'll tell you we don't have the answers just yet. So to hang tight. So Elaine, can we go to some of the questions that we might be able to answer tonight?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm going to start with one that's actually written in the chat right here because it's the last thing that came in. It says, do you have any more information on how a hybrid model could work? Is the class of how the class of students would be divided?
Well, we had talked about that, and Steve, certainly feel free to weigh in, and if Jody's online, she can also help to weigh in on this. I think we've certainly talked, Steve, you and I have talked a lot about, do we, for example, look at just freshmen and sophomores coming in, or juniors, seniors. We talked about all that kind of thing, and at the end of all that discussion, for probably a couple of weeks, I think we landed back on the alphabet and kind of going through and aligning it more alphabetically. That doesn't mean, though, that you're going to have just classes with only, like, I don't know, students' names who start with A to, I don't know, pick a number, pick a letter G, because we will still be looking at interspersing different things, but that would be the foundational piece, point at where we start, and then we'll build from there. Elaine?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know if Steve was going to jump in.
Steve, is there anything that you want to add or no?
That's absolutely correct. We're going to go with an alphabetical kind of thing. It just makes more sense, especially because we've got students that are in middle school that are younger, and parents would like to see, we believe that parents would like to see them be able to be home to take care of their siblings and whatnot.
Mhm.
It seems better for everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
So the other questions that I have been long lost into the depths of the chat, so I'm going to paraphrase. Can you speak directly to classrooms without windows, because there are a number of them in the high school, and how that will work in terms of ventilation and overall health and safety in those rooms?
So I'll take a stab at that because we've actually had that discussion already, Steve, and I know that you and I have had this discussion with Rob Frieswick, and I think that if there are rooms where there's not appropriate ventilation, then we won't be using those rooms. So we're looking at just making sure that we only use rooms that have full functioning ventilation.
And most of our rooms do have good
Yeah.
ventilation. They've done a great job of bringing the inside air outside. So Rob is pretty confident that our rooms that are enclosed are well ventilated. So
Yeah, every room in the high school has been checked.
The next question is, with regards to electives and if they may need to be changed or reduced, will they be chosen for the students, or will they still have the choice of available electives?
So I think in guidance, we're going to try to do the same thing we normally would, which is if there is a good fit that is almost the same elective, we might go ahead and slide that in. But if there's not a good fit that's a good exchange, then we tend to leave it open, reach out via email. Guidance is still going to be working on schedules before school starts. And I want to assure everybody, we believe that a student's schedule is vitally important. When they have a good schedule, they have a good year. And getting all of our kids into the courses that they want to take is of the utmost importance to us in guidance. And I'll just address another question that was in the chat, if you don't mind. It was about electives. And if I can't get all my electives, are you going to hold me to the graduation requirements? And we wouldn't do that. Children are held harmless during this time of the pandemic. If somebody can't get a graduation requirement, we'll come up with some kind of an exchange. We want everybody fully booked and learning in a full schedule, but nobody's going to not graduate because they couldn't get an elective because of the schedule, because of COVID.
The other thing too, if I can just jump from that too, Jody, one of the things that the school committee has looked at too was making sure that if there are any policies that we need to change during this time period, we're going to make those changes as well. And that could include changes linked to graduation requirements. So we have this at the forefront of our minds as well.
And we're working to try to make sure that doesn't need to happen, but it might be individual. It might have to happen for certain individuals, but we're hopeful that won't be the case.
Jody, while we have you here, do you have ideas about how seniors will be able to get help with college essays or the admissions process, or even information about what colleges are doing and how they're changing?
I'm really glad that you're here.
Yeah, we have a lot of ideas, and we've talked about maybe having like evening workshops for the kids. We want to work with the kids on doing their essays. We want to work with them on how to evaluate colleges when they can't go on campus and visit. Working with our athletes who are struggling with the not having teams and not getting scouted, and what are the changes coming in NCAA. And I started to put out some information over the summer and realized it was bits and pieces, and that was going to be perhaps worse than being able to just wait when we can do this in a comprehensive fashion. So seniors are huge for us. It's nice that we're going to have additional PD days, but by September 16th, we're usually knee deep or hip deep with our seniors and already getting applications submitted. So guidance is going to have to begin working on a little bit of a different timeline in there somehow, because we know that our seniors cannot necessarily wait.
Do you believe the colleges are also working on a different timeline?
So I know I have a wide audience here. I'm going to be careful with what I say, but colleges are businesses, and these businesses are afraid that they don't have a lot of clients right now. And so I think that they're going to still be promoting their early action programs. I think they're going to want to pull in as many applications as they can. we know they are going to be much more holistic this year. They are 100% fine with pass fails. They are going to be much more forgiving and generous with, they're worried about filling their seats and they're worried about backlogs. So some, for the parents out there, and I don't want to launch into college, I know I can talk too much on that, but some portion of the kids who don't go back this year because of COVID may never go back. And aside from the individual students involved, a college now has empty beds, and most of them operate on a pretty slim margin. So the colleges, this is going to make the colleges especially amenable to working with this rising senior class in a variety of ways. And I will tell you, I know in September, we usually have a nuts and bolts college admissions. We're already thinking about live streaming that and maybe talking to the superintendent about maybe 50 people in the auditorium, 6 seats apart, like how many people can we get into the auditorium as well as live streaming. So we are looking at all different ways of doing these things.
Thank you. How about more of a nuts and bolts question, not for Jody. You talk about students that drive to the high school and parking. There's a lot of permits and juniors had restrictions on their parking. Do you have any idea of what that will look like?
At this point, we really don't. I mean, we're looking to get kids back into school at this point. But we know that that's an issue. And as soon as we figure out how we're going to get school to open in the fall, we'll definitely look at that. I mean, it's just too early to say.
But I would want parents to know that we've already had some preliminary discussions on this because we know that that's a critical component. So that is being discussed.
Okay, so those are all the main questions that came through on the chat. That sort of, there wasn't a back and forth in the chat on it about. There was a clarification question about the hybrid. So say students from one class, say one level of English, would have half the students in person taking the class while the other half would be taking it remote at the same time? We don't know.
No, that's not necessarily the way that it will work. Again, that's one of those more to come moments as we take a look, because we still are not, like I said right at the beginning, we're still not sure what staff we're going to have available to us just yet. We don't know whether we'll have 80% of our staff back, 90, 95%. There's still a lot for us to work through. We still have impact bargaining that has to happen. There's still a lot of things that go into this. So we wouldn't be in a position to give a good solid answer on that tonight.
Okay, well, these parents did not hold back. So I think that is all the questions because I don't see anything trickling in at the moment. But as always, they can email the principal, the guidance department, the superintendent, wherever those questions need to go. I put a bunch of emails up at the beginning of the chat, but for all of our Neshoba email addresses, first initial, last name at nrsd.net.
Yeah, and I want to thank the parents too. I know that it was important for us for consistency across the district that we went through all of the questions. We know that some of these questions weren't really applicable to you, but it might be to the person sitting next to you, or it might be to somebody that you were speaking with on Facebook or whatever. So it was important for us that we stay with the consistency of answering all the same questions. So we thank all of you, and you're absolutely right, Elaine. And thank you, Elaine, for doing this again. We appreciate it. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Sorry. There were a couple of questions. I apologize that I missed them. About taking classes outside of Neshoba, either early college credit, community college courses, other online classes, things like that for credit.
So every year we have some students do dual enrollment. It's traditionally a senior program. I think the low I've seen is 2 and the high I've seen is 13, but that was a number of years ago. This year we already have a few students of our seniors who are doing dual enrollment. And just for those of you who don't know, you are able to take your courses at a local community or state college, or even UMass Lowell. And all of this is dependent upon their availability. So if they have space to take the high school students, you remain a student at Neshoba. You're eligible for sports teams, activities. I've had students come back to be varsity field hockey captains or sing in the choir, and you graduate as a full member of the class with all the activities. And and that's the traditional dual enrollment program. We have not traditionally had students be part-time dual enrollment students because you can't take some classes at Neshoba, some classes at the college with our rotating schedule. And we pretty rarely, it's been in special circumstances. I can think of 3 times when we had juniors who enrolled in the dual enrollment program, and those were for very specific reasons. I'm open to listening to things. This is not a traditional year. This is not a typical year. This is not a normal year. Everybody's circumstances are different. And I want you to stay as connected to Neshoba as possible. And if doing that means taking some courses off at a college, at a community college, I think that that's a worthwhile thing to explore and to reach out to me for. I just want to tell you that I know I was in contact with Quinsigamond today because we have 2 courses that we work as a middle college program for, and our kids get college credit, and their teachers are teaching remote as well. And so is it a good fit for your student to not be remote at Neshoba, but to be remote at a college? And I think that that's a really individual decision to really think about, because the students are losing the camaraderie they have with their friends. They may not see them in person every day, but we're all in physics together. And we all have to address these chemistry things. Do you know, the different things that are happening create that camaraderie that I know the kids who do dual enrollment, that they feel that as a loss. They have other gains for sure, but that is a loss that I ask all my dual enrollment students to think about.
I think too, Elaine, before we sign off, thanks, Jody. Steve, did I capture everything correctly with regards to the schedules, or did I miss anything that you'd want to put out right now about your skeletal schedule that you're all working on?
I think you got as much as possible, and we're really in the beginning stages of it. So we're working towards trying to figure out how it's going to work. So I don't want to say anything that might change in tomorrow. You know.
I see, and I know that's always a tough thing about having nights like tonight, because we all know we could have different answers come tomorrow morning, quite frankly. So we know that. So I think we want to just put that out there again. This is the best that we know right now tonight, July 30th. Thank you to our parents. Thank you so much for being with us and being tremendous partners in all of this, right from March until right now. And we thank you so much for everything that you do. To our staff tonight, thank you for being on here. But yet again, we appreciate it. Thanks, Elaine. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.